much, Mimi. It's really great to see you again after such a long time. We've been writing and now I'm here. Thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you Rob and Amita for your really great talks about how to manage sites and how really difficult these questions are. And I'm really happy you cited wall paintings, Amita, at the end, because that's actually where the reason I came from Oxford to the Courtauld over 20 years ago, and I've just recently come back to London after a career in Europe, and I'm now the head of conservation at the Courthold Institute of Art, which is this building here. I thought I would start here just telling you a little bit about the Courthold, because we are one of the leading institutes for conservation education and art history in the UK and indeed in the world. And at the Courthold, we not only teach conservation, but we are also a centre for research and science. And behind this statue here, we also have a leading gallery, the Courthold Gallery, of important Impressionist and other paintings. At the Courthold, we teach easel painting conservation, which is a 3-year program, and we also teach wall painting conservation. And it is about the wall painting conservation that I'm going to be talking about today. And if I were not here speaking to you, I think my colleague Sibylla Tringham would be here giving this talk. She's now on maternity leave, but she is leading the wall painting conservation course, and I am now the head of department and speaking on behalf of the course about wall paintings. And you see Sibylla here treating paintings in the Nagor fort using to try to reduce one of the biggest problems that we have when we face wall paintings, which is the influx of water and soluble salts. Soluble salts that we find everywhere from Dover Castle to the mountains in the Alps. Soluble salts, which if they crystallize on the surface of paintings, can destroy them in very little time. So I thought I would try to talk through some of the principles of conservation of wall paintings today, citing 2 examples from historic buildings, one of which I worked in, the other one I haven't. And I'm going to start today with the Grand Master's Palace in Malta, in the capital of Malta, Valletta. Very important palace because this is where the leaders of the Knights of St. John would live, and this is the centre now for the Maltese government. And within this palace, there are many wall paintings decorating the ceilings and decorating the rooms of the building. Now, if you've ever been to Malta, you'll probably remember it as a fantastic and very, very small European country, which doesn't have its own supply of lime plaster. And so one of the big problems in Malta was the actual application of plasters made of lime to walls. And in fact, later in the 17th century and 18th century, many of the paintings in Malta were done with oil on stone. But instead, these paintings here by Perez de Lecco are painted in fresco. And they are in relatively good condition, although they are now being conserved after many years of neglect. Instead, I'm going to talk about a project that the Courthold was involved in another room in the same palace of the Grand Masters. Now, if you are aware of remember your history, in the 1940s, there was a great siege of Malta, and Malta was heavily bombed. And the bombing in Malta caused the massive detachment of the wall painting surface, the plaster, from the stone support. And one of the paintings in the Grand Master's Palace was seriously damaged during the bombing in 1942, sorry. And for 60 years, these paintings were covered in these lottery tickets that were applied at the time using flour paste to face the surface and protect the painting from falling off the wall. And as I think Amita mentioned, one of the biggest risks that we have is that the paintings will actually fall off. They will be gone. That will be it. They're very vulnerable to maintenance problems. Now, fortunately, the building of the Grand Master's Palace, the roof was fine, it was maintained, but instead these lottery tickets remained on the surface of the painting because nobody knew what to do, how to remove them, and how to stabilize the wall painting. And normally when we talk about the best way of preservation is prevention. The best way of conservation is maintenance. But what if we don't have a solution and how to treat these paintings? What should we do? Who are the doctors? Who are the conservators we should turn to? Well, the Maltese government asked experts from around the world, and we're told that the only thing that could be done would be to rip the paintings off the wall, put them somewhere else. That wasn't a solution that we were very happy with at the Courtauld. And instead, when we arrived at the to examine the paintings, having been experts were called and examined the paintings and tried to figure out what could be done, the first thing that we need to do was to document the condition of the paintings, to try to document exactly what is happening. And here you can see a raking light image, very large paintings, these are very large paintings, and you can see how rough the surface is of these paintings. And you can also see, I think in the middle of this screen, if I turn on my pointer, you can see here the stone underneath where there's been loss of the paintings themselves. Big pieces of plaster have fallen off. Study of the paintings revealed the fact that much of the paintings were actually hiding voids. They were voids of empty spaces beneath the painted surface. Some of the voids were very large indeed, if you consider that this wall painting is this is 1 meter here. So we're talking about 8 meters by 5 meters, more or less. And this is one of the scenes, but the chapel is filled with wall paintings, with many voids. And one of the problems with voids is not that they exist, but in this case, they are contiguous voids. So very large areas of plaster were actually not detached from the wall. And close examination of the plaster revealed that this plaster was very thin, 1 or 2 millimeters thick. There's a big risk that in removing those lottery tickets, the plaster would actually fall off the wall. 50% of the 120 square meters of wall painting was separated from the wall. That's what we estimated at the time. And in some areas, the detachment from the wall was not small. It wasn't 1 millimeter or 2 or 3, but it was almost up to 4 millimeters. That's a huge amount for a very thin plaster. And those lottery tickets had held the plaster in place for 60 years. But if you can imagine what an old Agatha Christie looks like, a 60-year-old book, perhaps slightly damp some of the year, paper is not very strong in those conditions, and there was a big risk that the paper would actually was also cracking. You can see cracks here coming through. And the big question was, well, how can we address this? If we're not going to take the paintings off the wall, which would be very difficult and destructive anyway, can we try to re-adhere them to the stone? And one of the problems is that you can buy glue. You can buy all kinds of glues and materials, cements, and so on and so forth. However, those materials are not very compatible with the original materials. And I remember Rob mentioned like for like, and like for like isn't very easy in this situation. We don't have a like plaster to stick the 1 millimeter plaster back on the wall with a 4 centimeter void. So instead, conservators at the Courtauld here, we have Stephen Rickaby and Lisa Shikeda worked on the development of new materials, innovative materials which would satisfy the performance characteristics needed to treat these paintings, to allow the careful and sustainable re-adhesion of the plaster to the stone support, not trying to fill all the voids, but trying to create a stable surface. And that required a great deal of research so that the injection grouting that was done here, which is one of the most difficult interventions in wall painting conservation, could be carried out. And this took many years, 3 or 4 years of conservation treatments to in sequential steps to stabilize the paintings. The good thing though, is that this painting, since it was finished, has not needed to be treated at all. Here we can see the removal after the stabilization of the plasters, the gradual removal of the lottery tickets. And here you can see the date, 9th of October, 1943. They lasted 60 years and they were removed. And underneath, we have a very beautiful and well conserved painting. And because they were not removed, these paintings still, they're in very good condition in the Grand Master's Palace in Valletta, and they are visible to all those who go and visit the Grand Master's Palace itself. And the reason I showed you this example was really to highlight how difficult it is to treat. There's no one-size-fits-all treatment. Indeed, conservation of wall paintings often relies on innovative new solutions that we find on an almost case-by-case The next and second example I thought I would share with you today comes from the Achitradgar Fort and Palace complex in Nagaur in Rajasthan, where the Courtauld has been working since 2005. And under the direction of the Maharaj Museum Trust and His Highness Maharaja Gai Singh II, this has been the subject of major conservation interventions. And indeed, the Courtauld arrived at Nagaur after the architectural conservation had already taken place, the maintenance of the building, which is a very, very important step. So here we see the Hani Rani Mahal and other buildings in Nagaur, which are very beautiful from the outside, but in the inside of these buildings, they're decorated with fantastic wall paintings. One of the big problems that we have in outdoor climates like this is the accumulation of dust. Accumulation of dust and the types of climate change that we heard about later, dust storms and cycles of pollution can cause massive problems to wall paintings, because wall paintings are the interface between the building and the outside world. And in this case, we see an example of the careful application of a cleaning method for the gradual removal of the dust and dirt which is accumulated on the surface. When considering wall paintings and wall painting conservation, one of the first steps is the mapping of the condition, trying to understand in a similar way to the management plans that we saw earlier with Rob, but on a very much finer detail, the types of conditions that we will find, for example, here in the Sheesh Mahal North Vault wall paintings. We see areas of detachment. We see areas of severe detachment, some cracking, for example. Other areas where there's flaking, micro flaking, and also the big baddies that I mentioned earlier, the soluble salts. Salts which might be thin or might be very thick. And I think what you understand from this map that I show you here is that there's not one simple, easy solution to these wall paintings. There are many different things happening at the same time. And therefore, condition assessment, where we carefully map the current condition of a painting, is very important when we, in terms of defining the different methods we would try to adopt in addressing each one of the degradation factors. Here is an example of the beautiful paintings that we can see with our eyes. But if we use scientific methods like UV-induced luminescence, we can see instead the hidden details that are no longer available, that are no longer visible. Indeed, if I'll go back a moment, the organic yellow pigments that you can see bright yellow in this image have faded. And the cloud-like structure that we can see in the background is also very difficult to see in the visible light. And this technique gives us an insight into the way the paintings once looked, but they no longer look today. And on the left-hand side, we can see the salt efflorescence, the salt appearing on the surface of this painting. It's really difficult to know how to remove them because we can't use water to remove them. And if we remove them, will they come back or not? And on the right-hand side, we can see some testing in the field. Very important aspect of wall painting conservation is the possibility that we can do rapid tests in the field using relatively inexpensive methods to identify, for example, what type of salts do we have? Is it sodium chloride, or is it potassium nitrate, or is it calcium sulfate, or is it something else that we have on this surface? Here's another example of the beautiful wall paintings within the complex. And we can see here, the reason I wanted to show you this is something that's happened to the lead pigments. Conservation is often about mitigating or accepting change. And one of the changes that we often find with the pigments that we see in wall paintings is inevitable chemical degradation. And here we have an example of lead white and red lead. Beautiful pigments, but they're not very stable. And they tend to degrade and oxidize to darker mineral, platinumite, which is a black color. We can't reverse this. This has happened. This is the original material, but it's no longer the original color. On the right-hand side, instead, we see the ink work, which was used to paint this woman's face. And here we see another example of the thinning of a treatment that was applied in the past, but which actually caused significant change to the surface. Best efforts in the past to conserve these wall paintings and to stabilize the flaking surfaces were applied using what was believed to be the best adhesive, PVA. But PVA reacts, PVA yellows, and PVA also creates other acetate salts. And so careful and selective cleaning of the background in this figure succeeded in creating a much more homogeneous effect and to remove that yellowing, disfiguring yellowing. But it also highlighted how difficult it is for us because we don't, as I said, have the magic solution of all the right materials, but we do have ways of trying to test the compatibility of materials and the suitability of those materials in different contexts and climates. In situ investigations like these, for the examination of the surface of the paintings are critical because what I can see with my eyes, I know is not what you see with yours. And moreover, conservation is about an effort to document the condition of the surface so that we can come back, for example, next year and check to see if that surface has changed or not. And here we can see a relatively inexpensive portable microscope for the examination of the condition of the surface of the wall paintings. And here we see the way the paintings look after treatment. They're legible, they're stable. And that is what we want to achieve in trying to conserve wall paintings, to make them stable. Not to restore them to some idea of former glory, not to paint them or overpaint them with modern pigments, which might make them look a bit different, but instead to respect the original and to restore stability so that they will last a lot longer. And in the face of climate change that Rob mentioned, we recognize that as a major risk. And the footfall is another major risk. But do you know what the biggest risk is for wall paintings, in my view? People like me, conservators, who might come along and decide that what they really need is a nice coat of varnish, or what they really need is some new fancy material, some composite material which will make them shiny again. Because I don't know how we will remove that in the future. And the costs related to conservation are often very, very large. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. But what we do produce in conservation projects is a great deal of data, a great deal of new insights into the way materials behave, and we also develop methods so that we are able better to stabilize and treat paintings in other places in the future. Now, I'd like to close today with a bit of an advert for the conservation programs at the Courtauld, because in 2022, we'll be opening the wall painting conservation project the conservation of wall painting master's degree again. We also have in 2022 a master's in the conservation of Buddhist art. And I invite you to contact me and look on our website for both these programs, and write to me, please, if you're interested in coming to London to learn conservation of wall paintings. Thank you very much.